Dr. Aggarwal, we're all really excited to hear how you've been able to accomplish what you've accomplished and any insight in protocol. I know you sent me a name. I know I reached out to him, but maybe if you send a connecting email, we might get some more traction, because just a random person saying, "Hey, can you send me information?" often doesn't work.
Oh, okay. Yes. And can you tell me who are you Aaron?
I'm Avery.
Avery. Okay. Okay. Nice to meet you, Avery.
Yep. And do you want me to read your bio real quick before I let you go, or do you want to introduce yourself?
Go ahead. Go ahead. I'll let you do it. That sounds good.
So Dr. Kumar Aggarwal is a physician and medical geographer. He's a board-certified fellow of both the American Academy of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation and the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine and Hospice Care. And so thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Aggarwal. We're really excited to have you here. Let me turn the screen so you can see everyone online and in person here as well. And maybe I'll make this. Do you want to share anything, or are you just going to be talking? I can do this.
I'm sorry. Yes, if you can give me screen sharing ability for a moment, I can show you some things. But mostly I'm going to just chat, and I appreciate, and I definitely want to take some time for some questions, and I appreciate the invitation. It's great to connect with everybody over on the East Coast. I recognize some folks in the chat, in the conversation already. I saw Stephen Apcon over there.
Hi, Sunil. This is Corinne.
Oh, hi, Corinne. Okay, nice to see you. Nice to see you. But yeah, Stephen actually had worked with us on this project that I'm going to share with you a little bit about when we were focusing on the right to try access for psilocybin. And we really appreciated his talents and focus on the patients that I had been taking, my patients here who were party with me in the court. So the first thing I want to tell you is, like, what the update is on our case, because part of what I've been able to do is really thanks to working with really wonderful attorneys, including, like, when I first moved to New York, Noah Potter, who was one of the first attorneys that I was always brainstorming ideas with, including when he started New York for mental health, options, like we were talking back in those days. But even before that, I love working with attorneys who want to partner with doctors and medical professionals. I think it's like a really important thing, that it's such a complex area of regulation, healthcare, and then you mix into that controlled substances, and it's like, okay, you have like multiple libraries of textbooks that you have to understand the regs of, unfortunately. But anyway, that's the beauty of working in teams. So Catherine Tucker was the attorney in this particular case that's really been my wonderful partner and representative. And she originally had the ideas of how to approach psilocybin access under right to try. And kind of what I'm going to tell you is that I'm going to give you the ending now, is that we have not resolved that problem because we created another case in the process of trying to resolve it. I lost access to video. Can you guys still see me?
We can still see you, yeah.
Okay. All right. So the upshot of that is that we are now going to be before the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals a second time. We were already before them in September of 2021 when they heard oral arguments in our case, Ames versus DEA. This was a case about whether the right to try law required the Drug Enforcement Administration to develop a pathway for us to access psilocybin, even though it was a Schedule I drug, because it was also an eligible investigational new drug per the federal law that regulates substances that have gone through phase 1 clinical trials and that are still in development. And insofar as those substances, those drugs are needed in the course of medical care for people with life-threatening illnesses who may not have enough time to live to see the drug come to fruition, to come to approval, right? To try bridges that gap. and says as long as there's a eligible investigational drug, there's a willing doctor and a willing supplier, those three can have a, can make a supply line work for an individual patient in the course of treatment. And this law has been in place since 2018 at the federal level, and it's in 44 states, and it's being used all the time. If you have cancer, if you have ALS in particular, there's a lot of write-ups in cases of patients who are, seeking experimental treatments to slow down Lou Gehrig's disease, slow down their advanced cancer, and that's how it's working. The same way, if you have psilocybin, which may have a beneficial role to play in advanced illness based on existing data, which I'm not going to have time to review here, but just suffice it to say that, if you're anywhere near First Avenue, like in Manhattan, that's where a lot of some of the studies themselves happen. When I was at NYU myself, the NYU group that did a lot of this hard work with Stephen Ross and Jeffrey Gus and Tony Bossis, those three working together to set up clinical trials for cancer patients. And Michael Pollan visited, and the rest of that is history. I mean, so many things came out of that. So it's been known for a long, and that was one of several studies that have been done showing this improved quality of life, less wish for hastened death, less existential anxiety, less depression, like less pain, and going on for months and months for people who have these really advanced conditions and usually don't get long-lasting relief from the dread of the illness. So lots of evidence to support that. Plus, it's gone through phase 1 and in phase 2 and even early phase 3. So it should be an eligible drug. But the court did not want to actually decide that question. They punted it. And they said, no, we don't want to second guess a federal agency unless you've actually exhausted all the options to make sure that their decision was final. So this is kind of a legal strategy to kind of an off-ramp is what the attorneys called it. They took an off-ramp and said, we don't want to answer the bigger question, even though they recognize that my patients had advanced illness. They fast-tracked everything. We had the Attorney General of Washington State argue on our behalf, and it was joined by the Attorney Generals of multiple other states. I can't remember if New York was part of that or not. But a large swath of states, including states you'd be surprised, we're joined that amicus brief, and ACLU and even Cato Institute and a bunch of organizations that were like, this is valid. The court did not wish to rule on it. Said you guys haven't exhausted everything, and the DEA said in their responses, well, if Aggarwal in the clinic wants to do this, just they can petition to reschedule psilocybin, because right now it's Schedule 1 and we can't do anything with that. We have to stick to this Nixon era law, not this Trump era law. So that's kind of how that got decided, and that decision came down in January of 2022. So right away, we filed a petition to reschedule psilocybin. And we also filed a petition to a waiver request for the DEA to waive the requirements of the usual law. That was another sort of strategy. The waiver request came back first, and they said, we already told you no. You're exactly asking us the same thing you asked us last year, and sorry, we have no way to waive any of the requirements of the Controlled Substances Act to facilitate you. If you want to have psilocybin, you need to register as a researcher and get a researcher's license. There's no such thing as right to try access. That was sort of what they were saying. Exactly the same thing. So it was really kind of a dead end. And then the second question about rescheduling psilocybin, that's what the case that we have right now is about. So they denied that as well. I got a denial letter in September of about a year ago, maybe 13 months ago. Got a letter, said, thank you very much for, writing it to us, but since the FDA has not approved any kind of psilocybin, we can't do anything with this, even though we had a 9-page petition and really cited a lot of the research from Matthew Johnson at Hopkins, who's the first federally funded psilocybin researcher. Really, in the modern era, I think there was psilocybin federal funding in the 60s. when Maryland Psychiatric Institute was doing work with psilocybin and alcoholism. But in the modern period, nobody has gotten grants that fund psilocybin research except Matthew Johnson. And he wrote an article a few years ago on using the the criteria to determine scheduling and what psilocybin, where it should fit. So it was the kind of this just very brief, a couple of sentences. Sorry, we're not going to carry this forward. They didn't even send it for a review at HHS, which is what we were wanting them to do, which is kind of the reason we took them. So we sued them again. So this is sort of another case that now then the Ninth Circuit took that case up. We put the right to try piece on hold, and we said, okay, we're going to focus on rescheduling because this has ramifications for right to try and many other things. So we took that to the Ninth Circuit, and then we had a whole series of briefings back and forth with the government, and we had a whole other round of amicus brief supporters. Many of the same came to our aid, except the Attorney General's office this time did not. ACLU and more researchers actually came to our aid this time, including the researcher I had referred you to over at Harvard, Yvonne Bussant, and David Nutt, and Roland Griffiths, a number of prominent scientists and doctors and other agencies, organizations. So it was really nice to see that. And this time the DEA actually wanted to make a deal, and they said, okay, well, maybe you can let's settle this out of court, and can you just send us some more references that show that psilocybin has any medical use, and maybe we'll reconsider, and maybe we'll send it on to the HHS. But yeah, because maybe there is another schedule that psilocybin could be in based on what we know. So it was kind of, on the one hand, them admitting that there is a possible world out there where psilocybin doesn't live in Schedule 1, which was nice in writing, but then also giving nothing in return, like they weren't going to guarantee that they were going to pass it on to the HHS for the medical and scientific review, which is required by law. So we said no to that deal, and so they continue. We now have this series of briefings in which this was all discussed, and I'm going to show you that if you go to where to go here, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. This is the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit calendar for Sandra Day O'Connor, U.S. Courthouse, Phoenix, Arizona. And you can see October 16th to 20th. There's all these cases. And we are, last case here, it's at 9 o'clock in the morning on October 20th. So that's basically 10 days from now. Aggarwal versus the USDEA, petition for review of the USDEA's denial of a petition seeking to initiate rulemaking proceedings to reschedule psilocybin. If you have anybody that in the Phoenix area that's interested in sort of bird dogging, bird watching, packing the courtroom, like kind of keeping these judges, there's three panel judges accountable. It's going to be Ituda, Bade, and Bress. And I don't know much about these judges. I need to learn more. I'm going to be down there. There is a live stream link as well, which I'm going to share with you here as well. So you can watch it from wherever you're at, the oral arguments. But this is sort of how the case around necessity for medical access for patients who are critically ill, who are terminally ill, seriously ill. This is how this has become, this is where that's gone. I think that's kind of what I'm hoping to convey to you all, that in the process of trying to ask these questions, which I think in itself is a victory, to be able to ask these questions in a federal court setting, and then to garner the support of like health organizations, professional organizations, researchers, even law professors and things like that. So that's kind of what I'm excited about. And I should also tell you that, we've been able to garner a lot of support from hospice and palliative medicine doctors and nurse practitioners. There is a American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine, which I'm a member of. and a fellow of. We have a safe use of psychedelic-assisted therapies special interest group, or forum it's called. It was founded in, I think it might have been 2017 now, so it's about 6 years old, I would say. It's wonderful that there's, like, I think the last check, somewhere between 300 and 400 members in that group. You know, it's huge. And it's just like, that's just shows you how much interest there is in professionals who deal with patients with palliative care needs, how much interest there is in psychedelics, and specifically psilocybin. And a number of folks, in order for me to even reach those folks, I had to create an alternate listserv, because the Academy would not let me post about this court case. Like, oh, that's too much legal, we can't really get involved in that, we can't use our forum, even though we're dealing with a basic access issue. But so we did some workarounds, and I had to, create a separate forum and everything. But a number of those doctors, including, Craig Blinderman, who I used to work with up in at Columbia, who's the director of the palliative care services over there, Columbia University. He's supported our effort and has signed on a letter, including a number of other, clinicians across the country. So that's kind of the question, and the case has been able to us to sort of garner positions and sort of make this sort of a, well, obvious question to ask, or a question that the government sort of has to answer, or at least these judges have to answer. So that's kind of the current status. And I have, I think there's some legal, we're working on the attorney. So Catherine Tucker, I mentioned to you, who's, nationally famous attorney who's argued at the Supreme Court around medical aid in dying laws. The original case that Oregon v. Ashcroft that created that right for dying patients to have access to aid in dying medicines. And she's worked on a number of other cases. And then two of the other there's a number of attorneys working on this, many of them low bono or pro bono, experts with DEA, with FDA, with regulations, and all kinds of different firms. Perkins Coie is a law firm in Seattle that's been doing a lot of work also on this case. But two attorneys that really, like, the one that's going to argue before the court is named Matthew Zorin, and he works closely with Shane Pennington, and both of these attorneys are probably the most experienced around sort of the DEA and kind of holding their feet to the fire around whether it's like cannabis regulations or even their way that they handle Freedom of Information Act requests, which is terribly, it's like very non-transparent. So they've kind of done a lot of work to sort of understand how they work. When recently the Biden administration's HHS released the, recommendation that cannabis be moved to Schedule 3, Washington Post calls Shane Pennington for his comment, on that. So these guys are really at the top of their game, and they're very hopeful about this case. They feel like this is a really obvious error that a way that the DEA has skirted some of its responsibilities in this case. So I'm going to, just share with you some of their arguments, and then we can talk a little bit more about this in general. 1 second, let me pull that up. And we should have a press release coming out like in coming days, as it gets closer to our court date, where, you'll be able to hear more from the attorneys and everything. But, it is a public case. And last time when we were in the Ninth Circuit, this was listed on their website as one of the most high interest cases of the Ninth Circuit. So, maybe hopefully the same thing will happen here. And I'm really happy to be able to share this all with you, because sometimes this is really what it takes, even, to kind of move things forward. Okay, so let me tell you, first of all, I'll give you the link in the chat for where the live stream will be, just in case you want to tune in. That's where it is. And then let's see. Stephen, I see a question about lawyers. All lawyer connections should go through the lead lawyer, Catherine Tucker. And I'll put her email in the chat here for that. I'm not involved in a lot of that lawyer connection, but and I'll try. And again, this is how they're thinking about this case. So so the present case is we're appealing the DEA's denial of the petition to reschedule psilocybin. We asked him for a very conservative thing, like just move it to Schedule 2, based on, and that's actually, you know, conservative. But number one, the DEA's attempts to usurp the authority Congress gave to HHS, and by HHS's delegation to the FDA. On matters involving medical and scientific evidence. So instead of them asking the right agency to ask the questions, they just sort of, oh, we think that there's enough evidence, or we and you know, it's ironic because the DEA wants me to send them more studies. So that's number one. Number two, that we've presented sufficient evidence to require the DEA to seek HHS's medical and scientific opinion on the rescheduling petition. Number three, the DEA cannot establish a national standard for acceptable or legitimate drug use. Like, that's not even their mandate. Number four, they had a suggestion of a voluntary remand. The DEA, they had contacted us and say, oh, let's just stop fighting in court. Let's kind of come back to you know, sell this outside of court. Would permit where the petition would return to the agency without a court decision on the issues, would permit the DEA to escape judicial review of its unlawful conduct. And then finally, the DEA acted in bad faith. After the DEA claimed in the first case to lack authority to permit access because psilocybin is a Schedule I drug, it invited us, the petitioners, to submit a rescheduling petition. And we did that, and we cited ample evidence to require the DEA to seek an opinion from HHS. So that's kind of the, you know, they're saying that this case brings into the focus the DEA's long history of applying an erroneous test to rescheduling petitions. And we're asking the court to find the DEA's conduct in denying the petition unlawful, to vacate the denial and order the DEA to refer to the petition to HHS for medical and scientific evaluation. So that is kind of the that's where this question, I wanted just to be able to treat two of my patients, one with stage 4 breast cancer, one with advanced GYN cancer, with psilocybin assisted therapy, just like we've been working with ketamine in my office for years. And this is where, you know, in order to do it under any kind of legal protection, we needed the permission from the DEA. Of course, Oregon, if they were living in Oregon, I guess if you got on a wait list, or maybe there's a fast track for people who are ill, I don't know. There's those wait lists for psilocybin services are like 1,000 people long, I've heard, you know. So it is a need, and this is sort of where that whole question has now landed me, literally 3 years into the process, and I'm not like thinking that this is the only way and the only solution to help people, you know, in the current context who need access to psilocybin, who are in palliative or hospice settings. I'm not saying that. There's many other things going on, including, you know, underground religious communities, decriminalization frameworks, but you know, it's just as a matter, the federal law is has such a ramification, and especially impacts the people who are the most vulnerable. You know, those who have the least resources are the most dependent on those kinds of systems. If you're, you know, different forms of institutionalized settings or things like that. So anyway, that's kind of why we fight on, and I'm really excited about this. I hope you all tell your friends in Phoenix area, or keep an eye on this, and kind of hold these judges' feet to the fire. Like, this is an important case that has larger ramifications, and it's really important that we have some degree of fairness when it comes to evaluating the medical and scientific facts regarding whether we think a drug has no currently accepted use and treatment in the United States, which is what the federal government is saying. On the other hand, the FDA is saying that it's a breakthrough therapy. You know, it's just and is eligible for right to try, and breakthrough therapy for like 2 different types of depression. So we sort of live with this schizophrenia because of, you know, just I believe it's a institutional and system inertia, that people within the system don't even know how to change the system. It's so big. There's a really interesting case about a DEA agent who lost his job because he used CBD with a little THC in it, was randomly tested. That you guys could, that's coming out of the East Coast, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. You could take a look at that. But so I'm hoping that this is, I'm not trying to do an us or them here. I think our system is just so messed up. And so hopefully this is a way we can use the system to change the system. So. Let's see, and let me, I see Stephen had his question about the date. It's going to be October the 20th, Friday, October 20th at 9 a.m. Let me paste it in the chat here. And that's 9 a.m. Mountain time, which that 7% of the less than 7% of the US population lives in Mountain time. But anyway, just make sure you're thinking about Phoenix time.
Wow, Dr. Aggarwal, this is ground shaking news, really. What do you, say you win the case, what do you think will happen?
If we win the case, the judges say, yeah, DEA erred in just dismissing your petition outright. They should send it on to the HHS for a review, which is basically what happened in the case. And when Biden a year ago said, hey, let's review marijuana scheduling, this is what they did. This is you saw the process. Everyone, who watches drug policy laws, happenings, that's what they did. HHS, Becerra, the HHS secretary, jokingly tweets on 420, okay, we'll be done with this soon, and and then they actually release it on 420. At the time, 420. I mean, I don't know what kind of jokes they're trying to do there, but or just, I don't know. It's a special. Everybody knows. I don't even think it's almost as a joke. It's almost like this is a cultural thing. But anyway, the point is that's the step that happened. And then they give that letter to the DEA and they said, here's our review. Now, DEA, you guys do your review, but you are bound by our medical findings. And that's actually what the 1970 law that Nixon signed, if you go and read the Controlled Substances Act, like that's what it says. They're not allowed to make up other law, like they're not a medical and scientific agency like HHS is. So my hope is that they sort of do that process, and anybody who has any kind of fair evaluation of the literature and the scientific data that we know, clinical trials that we have been done so many places, would certainly find that the abuse potential is not high, that it's low or moderate, and that the accepted use under medical supervision is there because of the, what's going on and has gone on. So that's what I would hope, that they would kind of become we would get that review. I don't know how long that would take, but there are deadlines that they have to face and processes. The DEA is very famous for just letting the clock run whenever they get a rescheduling petition. If you remember how a normal filed to reschedule marijuana in 1971, they didn't get their day in court until 1986. The ruling came down in 86. So this is kind of they've historically done this. So, but HHS has a little bit more, like their timelines are a little bit more governed by other rules and other processes. So that's what I'm hoping will happen. And then of course, ultimately, if we get that would then impact our right to try. If they recommend that scheduling change, that'll make it easier for us to access it under right to try laws. And that's kind of the immediate goal that we originally set out to accomplish. But it would have larger implications as well.
I just have one more question, and then I'll let everyone else ask some questions. But have you been following the VA's work to implement psychedelic-assisted therapy across the VA hospital system?
I saw like they had some panels or papers, where they've said that we should do this. That's the only thing that I'm.
So, and I have a bit of an inside track in that my brother works for the consulting company who has been hired by the VA hospital system to figure out how to implement this. And I had a meeting with the CEO of this consulting company about the logistics of training all the VA hospitals in psychedelic assisted therapy. And the Undersecretary of Health for the VA released a brand new podcast. And the first podcast was on MDMA and psilocybin and the healing capacity for veterans. So they are going to implement this next year, or if not next year, the year after. So it's definitely in process.
Yeah, and Bronx, VA, you're in your guys' own town, New York. Was one of the first places in the VA system that allowed an MDMA assisted therapy trial to take place, under the investigator-initiated trials that were made possible when MAPS Public Benefit Corporation had an MDMA drug compound in the pipeline. Phase 2, phase 3, they just published phase 3 trials data. So that's kind of that. And then the Loma Linda VA also has done a trial there. I worked with some of the investigators here. Portland VA is doing trials. So a lot of these investigators at VAs, but it all started, I believe, at the Bronx VA. I mean, if you go back to the 60s, it started at the Palo Alto VA, when Ken Kesey was given LSD in a VA. So it's not like the VA hasn't done, but if we're talking about the current wave, and that's kind of a great thing. And I think, really they're probably, my sense is that they're kind of going to be in concert with the MDMA drug development pathway. We've already had visitation at our clinic from a pharmacist, a PharmD, who's kind of the drug rep for MAPS Public Benefit Corporation, to kind of check in with clinics. Hey, do you have patients with PTSD? Do you have the setup that you might need and the training that you might need in order to implement this when we have an anticipated approval, which could be in a year or so. So that's a regulatory track that I think is exciting, and it's very much it's top down, but at least it's still down. It's not just top. It is one way to make things move, and I'm excited about that. And I think it'll be wonderful. So many patients languish with PTSD in the VA system, who don't have easy access to this because they're on fixed income, or they don't have access to the same networks that some of us might have here. So I think it's really important, and I'm really excited about that. Psilocybin, I don't know how much what they're looking at with psilocybin right now, but MDMA is certainly very exciting.
What else? Any questions?
Thank you so much, Dr. Aggarwal, for what you've just shared with us tonight. I'm wondering, we've got a lot of folks in the audience who are non-medical and probably non-legal too. And I'm wondering if you could just do a little, even if it's just an elevator speech on why psilocybin at the end of life. What's the deal?
Oh, well, psilocybin at the end of people who are dying, oftentimes are racked with untreatable or poorly managed dread, existential anxiety, fear of dying. It can lead to a lot of unrelieved suffering, difficulty being with loved ones, enjoying whatever time they might have left, even severe physical pain, but total pain, so how we call that, but it can impact many different things. So if you can treat that kind of anxiety with a therapy that really changes how you think about death and dying and your own mortality in a few hours, with preparation, with integration, with support, with the right safeguards, with the right setting, and that leads to a better life quality with the time they have left, it is equivalent to saving their lives. You've basically said there was one of our briefs in our case actually argues this, that this is like saving life. When you deal with people who don't have much time left to live and you do something to boost their life quality, you are saving their lives, because that's all you can do for them. Because you can't, and actually there may even be reasons to think that these kinds of treatments could alter the course of an illness. I have a partner who's a naturopathic oncologist and really is interested in that. And there's definitely some reasons to look at the larger physical changes that can occur with large psychospiritual shifts through the immune system, predominantly in inflammation. But that's a different conversation. So for research purposes, to sort of like help people have options where they don't have any, to ease quality of life when you're dying. I mean, that's the elevator pitch. It's like, I don't think there's really anybody against it, honestly. Like, I don't even think the people that are like saying no to us at the DEA, like, I don't know. I mean, I just don't think they don't think they have any other options. But this is one of those things that like is you don't really find opposition. I mean, you can let me know if you know anybody that's opposed to that, but I've never met anybody, but I could be biased. So.
And I just wanted to add on to that. I'm a nurse. I work in hospice.
Which hospice?
I work for a community hospice up here in Albany.
You guys are in Albany. Okay, I was thinking that was you guys were New York City. I'm sorry, I got my wires.
Statewide. There's people online from Long Island to Buffalo.
Okay, I trained in New York, and worked with a hospice in the city, so I was curious.
Yeah. Anyway. I was just gonna say that the medications that we do have available at this time to treat that agitation and dread and pain at end of life, if they do work now, really are only blunting those symptoms.
Right. I mean, you really use chaplains. You use nursing and chaplaincy and social work and the entire care network. That's really how we handle that. There's really no drug. I mean, you can use Ativan and Haldol and opioids to treat pain and anxiety, but this is like a deeper thing.
There's not a comparable treatment to what you're.
Oh no, right. I mean, that's right. All we do is just sort of be with, and that's it. There's nothing wrong with being with. Being with sometimes is all you can do, but if you can do more, we should certainly do that. And I think that's kind of what we're hoping. And this whole idea, by the way, of using these kinds of substances in life transitions is not like we just discovered this. This is like part of indigenous ways of knowing, people who've worked with entheogenic compounds for a long time. I think it's just applying it now into our very unique situation where we've extended life, but not quality of life. Like, this is what we've done in our healthcare system. It's really it can be quite disturbing, when you're okay, I'm living longer, but like, I'm just miserable and I'm just waiting for it to end. Like, did you really do something helpful? And especially if you're not coupling with that with a way to release some of this stuff. Oh, look, Allison Hoots is here. Did you have a question?
Does anyone online have questions? We have some more
Actually,
in the room too.
Yeah, I have a question. Can you talk more about the pain aspect of
Yeah, Joe, thank you. Pain, there's a lot. There's a recent article that came out in a European medical journal. I forgot which one, that was reviewing, I think it was a survey. I mean, there's a lot more relief of just good old fashioned like somatic bodily pain with psychedelic compounds than most people appreciate. And this was first described in 1960s with this researcher at University of Chicago. He was a psychiatrist and an internist, and he gave LSD to advanced cancer, mostly cancer patients, but also burn patients over at a hospital in U Chicago Medical Center. And he found the really impressive relief of like pain and like burn victims and advanced cancer patients from the 60s, where there wasn't a lot of things that we have today. So there is definitely that could be operating on multiple different levels. Even even microdosing of LSD was shown in a Swiss study, probably maybe 2 years ago now. They did a test where they, it's like a cold pressor test where how long can you handle really, really cold water, and putting your hand in really cold water. This is like healthy subjects, but you actually can tolerate it longer at certain doses of microdoses of LSD. That's what your Swiss researchers found. Compared to people who didn't have that. So it's a controlled trial. They use different doses, and there's even like a threshold where you don't get very altered and you still get the pain relief. So there's a whole other world there where we're able to show relief of, I guess I imagine it has something to do with the way in which processing of pain signals from the periphery that make it up into the brain. Pain is oftentimes, it's a helpful signal. So if you suppress it when you need to move your hand from that stove or you're going to burn your skin, that's a useful signal. And but it's kind of the pain where the signal information is not helpful or just continuously on a loop. I think that's really where we're hoping to make some inroads. But yeah, it's still and then there was UC San Diego case report from a physician and his patient who had a pain from a amputated limb. I can't remember how it was amputated. I think a traumatic amputation, phantom limb pain syndrome, and they were very detailed in how many grams of mushrooms he took in the desert. Apparently, he went out to the desert and did this and had a significant relief in pain. And I think they coupled it also with mirror box therapy, which is another strategy to deal with phantom limb pain. So creating a neuroplastic environment. So in phantom limb pain, your brain thinks your foot is there because it's always been there and now it's not there. And that kind of the lack of it causes a problem. But if you do mirror box therapy, you can kind of get the relief of seeing another limb there. But you still have to have neuroplasticity, to be able to make those new connections. And so psychedelic substances are neuroplastogenic. So they could be involved in rewiring those kinds of painful circuits. So, but that can be very, I think that's a great frontier. But there's less, big studies, Joe. But I know that there's a lot of folks interested in that.
Thank you.
Corinne?
Dr. Aggarwal, I'm curious about the dosage for a patient at the end of life. What is the dosage? What's the length of the experience?
Well, yeah, when I went at NYU, when they were doing this cancer anxiety study, I think they ultimately agreed on 25 or 30, I can't remember, one of those two numbers, milligrams of pharmaceutical psilocybin. Okay, that's kind of how they did their math. So you can back calculate what that turns out if you know a percentage of psilocybin and dried fungal, if you're trying to use whole fungal psilocybin. That's kind of the dose that they decided on, and kind of all comers, and then a psilocybin assisted therapy session, can last 6+ hours, depending on the individual.
And then
sorry,
you have to do a follow-up question, which is, do you know of anyone who would recommend a higher dose, or is that an ideal dose? Is that a dose that people came up with because they're being ultra careful, or is that the dose that people who understand this substance would recommend?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know about that. When you're dealing with people at end of life, drug dosing is a lot more individualized. There's a lot more factors around metabolism, liver, kidney function, body weight. So I do believe there's a lot more that you can put into the set and setting bucket in terms of making an experience more therapeutically meaningful, even at quote unquote lower doses. But yeah, I wouldn't translate what you might know in people that aren't dealing with advanced cancer to those who have that, because there's a lot more So yeah, it's better to be safer, at least initially, and the idea of having repeated sessions is also what they did in these clinical trials, that we have some data from. But they did not, in research studies, they don't really, in real life, you might vary the dose. Okay, this is how it was this time. This is how you did it. It was too strong, too weak. Next time let's go a little stronger. Let's go a little weak, less, depending on individual factors. But in the structured, I remember the binders for the study. It was like this massive, like you had to write out everything in great detail. You don't really have a chance to make those kinds of on the fly things. Things are there. There's a group in Canada on Vancouver Island in Victoria. Dr. Pam Krykow, Krykow, MD. She's partnered with a local hospital and an Indigenous First Nations community over there, and they are doing group psilocybin journeys for patients with illness, advanced illness. I think they have a few other tracks there, and they're doing a combination of people that are in clinical trials under their special access program and the exemptees that the Health Canada granted some exemptions to their drug laws to patients with cancer and other distressing conditions. They were able to have psilocybin, and they all, she's shared a lot of fascinating things from her work, and they've done a lot of work with this community now, that people actually enjoy doing this more in groups than individually. And I think like there's one patient that was the first one, the exemptee, that got access to psilocybin, fungal psilocybin, and he had a therapist come and visit him in one of the prairie provinces. And then so he had that session one-on-one with the therapist, and then he had a session with the group that she has on Vancouver Island, and he said that was more powerful for him. And he had, I forgot he had stage 4 cancer of some kind. So I'm just kind of like, we have to learn from groups like hers who are actually gaining this information for the first time, which I'm not doing, because I'm just we're still stuck on trying to find a way to do it legally. So, but we'll get there. And thank goodness for the Canadians, and I guess the Australians too. Eventually, they're starting things now. I don't know where things are at there, and I think a few other places in the world where we're going to be hopefully getting some real world data to learn.
And just I just did some quick calculating and figuring out. So you said 25 to 30 milligrams of pure psilocybin. Like a psilocybe cubensis typically has 10 to 12 milligrams of psilocybin per gram of mushroom. So that's really like 3 grams plus of mushrooms.
Oh, no
Right.
wonder it felt. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you
because
for doing
that's
the math.
right. That's in like the milligrams of pure extracted psilocybin.
Around 3.
Yeah, versus the actual whole mushroom.
That's right.
So it's not an insignificant dose. It's
Yeah.
Does anyone? I know there's been some comments. Does anyone else online have some?
Somebody. Yeah, there's some. You can look at the chat comments here. I see a question. Who are you looking to for training?
I think that was with the VA. Stephen had asked for the VA. I was going to answer him separately, but you can go ahead and answer that too.
No, I didn't know if he was asking about in my clinic or what the content. If that was for you, that's cool. I wasn't sure.
Right.
And then yeah, Dennis Kitchen, you had your math was double what we just heard. So maybe you can walk us through that.
Not exactly an exact science there.
Yet.
Yeah. Wow. Can you? So you already use ketamine assisted therapy in hospice and palliative care. How do you think that is going to? How do you think that's going to compare to psilocybin?
Yeah, I don't know yet. I don't know yet. I think that's what we have now, and it certainly, I've seen some good changes in patients who have access to that, to help with some of these same endpoints that we're talking about. The study that came out of Hopkins, Gul Dulen, MD, PhD, she's a researcher, mostly like in vertebrates, studying basic science of psychedelics on the brain. Her recent review suggested that the longer duration of action of a psychedelic substance, the more that it has, the more the critical period of learning window stays open longer in the aftermath of the exposure. So I think they did a rodent study where she showed this, both in terms of like genetically, like neurogenetic activity, and I think other kinds of like synaptic, like whatever markers of plasticity they were looking at, where you can really show that there's a lot more learning going on. The longer duration of action, so psilocybin, I was saying 6, maybe 8 hours, depending on dose, and versus ketamine, where it might be an hour if you take an intramuscular injection, hour, 20 minutes. But the sense of time is like really, you might feel like you were in there for hours, but it was only like, how that goes. But interestingly, her arguments are that there is a more sustained impact on the plasticity, which means that maybe you can do more with rewiring and integration with a longer duration. So that's just coming out of that research. I don't know how that's going to map to humans, but it's just something to consider. And on the other hand, there's a study that came out of I think it's University of Calgary or Alberta, one of those Canadian universities, that did a content analysis of trip sessions and said that ketamine trips are the closest to near-death experiences compared to any other, like Arrowhead reports or wherever you get like do the detailed reports of people's psychedelic journeys, that there was more, like a computer showed that there was more correlation, similar language that's used to describe NDEs. And that's kind of interesting, when you're dealing with a question like end of life existential distress. Maybe you want more of something that feels like I died, but you didn't die, but you feel, it really feels like it, and it's close. And if you read reports of NDEs, there's so many fascinating. University of Virginia had a whole NDE research center. There's a great documentary on Netflix about it if you want to see more about this. But people have very transformative, life-changing experiences after surviving, near death, and that could be really profound too. So that's where like I could kind of I just present to you both of these points, and we'll see what happens. But I think it's neither either. It's going to be both and, just like it is with everything in medicine. You have different things, and combinations also are there too. The Maryland Psychiatric Institute in the late 60s, early 70s, researchers I talked to, where Bill Richards was referenced here, Dennis mentioned, though he was working there. They did ketamine after psilocybin sessions for some of their subjects. So they would give them a psilocybin journey and then give them ketamine at the end. That's what I've been told by people who did work over there, federally funded research. So it's not like we can't do that again. And I'm expecting that's going to be the case, in the future, because that's how we do already. And that's actually, most medicine traditionally is combinations, so anyway, we'll see what happens.
So if there is interest in starting a psilocybin hospice and palliative trial in the capital region, how can we get that going?
Yeah, okay, capital regions, Albany, okay. Yeah, I mean, the people that I worked with were in Manhattan, and the group I mentioned was the ones that did those studies. And so I know actually at Rochester, University of Rochester, they have started ketamine-assisted psychotherapy for palliative care patients. They started that. And, one of the psychologists that worked there, he was in one of my ketamine training groups, like years ago. We worked together, and kind of talked and gave him some tips. I can give you his contact. And I think that might be that they might be the closest to you that I know of that's actually working with a psychedelic model. And that's what it's very important to talk a psychedelic model for ketamine. Okay, there's ketamine. Ketamine is a anesthetic, you know, and so there's an anesthesia model or a pharmacotherapy model, which have their place, but they're not psychedelic models. They don't involve preparation, you know, non-directed guidance, integration, like the kind of things that you see in non-ordinary states of consciousness work. So that's what they're doing there, and that's where I mean, I'm sure they're as keen on it as you are, but you know, it's usually the stumbling blocks are funding, and finding, you know, PIs and that kind of thing. But you know, I think community partners always help move things along. So that's one contact, and then, you know, like other people doing clinical trials in this area, which you can look on clinicaltrials.gov. I was giving you the contact for one of them, but I'm sure they get inundated with, you know, it's very, I told you how long those waiting lists are, right? For psilocybin services in Oregon. You can imagine how long the waiting lists are for research trials for psilocybin. So it's incredibly, it's very hard to respond to everybody. I think that's just the nature of there's such a high demand and such few resources. But that's why I think the best thing to do is to partner with local docs in the palliative world who are working on this, and there are a number in New York. I think also in the upstate area. So I think you'll have some. I'm going to send you that contact. Okay, I just don't have it off the top of my head right now, but I will.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, my hope is that this, you know, things will get easier, sooner, faster. But right now, just try all possible pathways, including what you guys are doing in the legislature in New York. I think that's, you know, really promising. I'm working on that in Washington as well. We have a working group working on this in our state. Oregon and Colorado are really leading the way.
Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions at all? Joe, Dr. Aggarwal, thank you so much for this talk, all the hard work that you've been doing for this initiative. I work in chaplaincy and hospice here in the Albany area, and one of the services that we provide is care for not just the patients, but the patients' families. Quite often going through, let's just say, an entanglement of existential forces and trippings. And I'm wondering to what extent you have worked with patients' families with psilocybin therapy, and whether or not the bill would be inclusive for patients' families looking ahead.
I have not had a chance to do that. Thank you for your work in chaplaincy. It's a wonderful field, and there's a lot of interest, by the way, in chaplaincy, finding a place with psychedelic therapy and care. Emory University and Harvard, I think, are two great places where they're really pioneering on that right now. Excuse me, a little scratchy just a second. So I think when we came, I worked with Evergreen Health here in Seattle area. We wanted to do a psilocybin trial. It didn't come to fruition because we had trouble getting funding and access. But our model was to also partner with the hospice and to find a way to do sessions where we could also involve family, actual subjects in the study as well as the patient. We did write that up. So there you go. It's still a low-hanging fruit to be done. Other people have talked about using MDMA assisted therapy for family members who have a different kind of trauma, you know, than the subject, the patient. So that could be also a very interesting. I do think that's a, you know, caregiver, just in general, care for caregivers is really an they need a lot of support too, for sure. But is there also like a sense in which if you can heal the patient, there is a ripple effect that can impact the family, but certainly I'm with you 100%. But I myself haven't had much of an opportunity. We've done some ketamine-assisted therapy sessions where it involves multiple family members, like a mother and a son, a teenage or adult son, or partners. I think that's something that can be done. But I don't know if I don't know what that would look like for a family member who's dying and one who's not dying. It seems like from the roots work that they're doing in Canada, it's good for those patients to meet other patients, like to actually have a group model around dying. I mean, that we don't even do that. We do that for bereaved families, right? Everybody gets together in a group. You lost loved ones in the last year. Let's meet on Thanksgiving. It's wonderful. It's really helpful, I think, and we need to do a lot of work in grief and bereavement as well. But we don't do that during the time, when the patient is alive. It's really interesting. So anyway, I just want to we can do a lot with no drugs if we had a model in which we recognize the needs of people that are caregiver distressed, So anyway, I hope you can innovate in your setting and try to help those families. It's really special, and I really think chaplaincy is going to play an important role in this rollout, or however we integrate this into palliative care into the future. It's a really important skill set and crosses into the spiritual aspects, which is what interests me the most. Okay, all right, everyone. Allison, did you have something that you wanted to ask me? Oh no, you just okay. I'll talk to you later this week. I think we have a chat scheduled. Okay, great.
Well, thanks, Dr. Aggarwal, so much for tuning in and talking with us. I really appreciate the time that you've spent and the resources that you've offered. I know one of the things that we have been saying to people over and over again is the fact that creating dialogue around the medicinal therapeutic use of psychedelics helps foster a better understanding of why it's necessary to have these medicines accessible. And I think that your tagline of saving someone's life at the end of their, I mean, I almost cried. Like that was, I definitely am going to write that down. And what we're doing is creating basically like conversation starters for how you can introduce a discussion to your friends, family, and coworkers, because the more people talk about it, the more it's going to spread.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'd love to be of any assistance in your efforts there in New York. A former New York resident myself, and please call on me. Thank you for your invitation.
Maybe someday.
Yeah, I would definitely. So I just have a few other businessy things. I know we're approaching 8:30. I don't know, Dr. Aggarwal, if you want to jump off.
I'll take it tonight. Thank you so much, you guys. Take care.
Thank you. All right, bye. Oh my gosh. Wow. That was incredible. So that was, one of the things I did want to talk about is creating basically like index cards or something with sentence starters or conversation starters. So if everyone online or here in the room can send me one sentence that we can look through and then parse them out, that would be absolutely phenomenal, because so many people have seen our advocacy efforts and I've talked to them and they're like, well, I just don't know. I understand I've benefited from these medicines, but I don't know how to talk to my mom, or I don't know how to talk to my kids, or my coworkers. And I think that imagine this Thanksgiving, if everyone sits around and actually creates some meaningful conversation around
not an issue in our family.
That is the nightly conversation.
So there's that, and then Corinne drafted an email to send to legislators, and did I share that? I know I wanted to.
Is it ready? I feel like I put something on paper, but I'm not
Well,
sure.
I don't know that it was. And that's another thing too, that we want to have that as a resource as well, especially as the legislative session gets closer, to be able, because we've been telling people to contact your legislator because that's the best thing that you can do. You know, your legislator does listen if more people contact them about an issue. It's a fact.
And I will say that, you know, it actually, it matters to use, you know, it matters to give people a suggestion about the language. But one thing I've learned about the legislature is they don't care if you're using the right terminology. They don't care if you know the bill number. If you're writing into them and saying, I want people to have access to psilocybin. And if they get 30 of those messages in a week that say something slightly different, they're taking more notice of that because it doesn't look like it's coming from some canned special interest lobby firm. I'm telling you, these organic conversations that you just pick up the phone and say what you're after without having a script are the best advocacy you can do.
So if we are spending a day at the Capitol on February 27th, if we have as many people as we can get a hold of contact their legislator the week before, I think that would be a phenomenal way to
And
create.
the week after,
And the
saying,
week
I heard,
after.
did you have a chance to run into our people up in Albany? Yeah.
Yeah, and the only other thing that I've been using in my discussions because of my interaction with this consulting firm, considering how to roll out training to all of the clinicians and therapists at VA hospitals, is the fact that between 9/11/2001 and 9/11/2021, 7,057 US soldiers died in combat. 7,057. And 30,177 died by suicide during that same period. The mental health crisis that our heroes are suffering right now is atrocious. And if we can help them with this psychedelic assisted therapy, even if we just help 1/10 of those people, we need to try. Like that's what has been staggering.
Right, it's their families too. and
Well,
their
right,
friends,
absolutely.
like that
Their
ripple
families, their
effect
friends, their
is
whole
huge.
network. Because if 30,177 people killed
That does.
themselves, the trauma that does is countless. Oh, I hate to